The function of glutathione in aging. It's been one of the most asked about questions that y'all will encounter. It's a huge topic, and it's been the topic of many, many research articles, literally thousands of them. We could spend a week talking about this, but don't worry, we'll be done before midnight. But first, for those of you who are new on the call, even though this is the last call, let's do a quick review on the topic of glutathione. Glutathione is a substance that exists already in your body. In fact, it appears in the cells of every living creature and plant in the world. Now, life as we know it could not exist were it not for this remarkable substance. So when I first started lecturing about glutathione over 30 years ago, it was a word that almost nobody had heard of, including doctors. If I asked an audience of 300 people who's heard of this word, very few hands went up. And here we are today, and now many, many people have heard of it, especially in the medical community and more in the general public. Why? Because right now, if you check on PubMed.gov, you'll find upwards of 200,000 published articles that deal with glutathione. PubMed is the main repository of research articles in the world, and it has all of the most prevalent journals listed on it. And every researcher is on this site every day. If you want to find the original research article, this is the place that you'll check first and probably find it. Just to put this number, 200,000 articles into context, if you looked up vitamin C, there's maybe 40,000 articles, and vitamin E, maybe 70,000 articles. So glutathione has more articles published on it than vitamin C and vitamin E put together. So in these 200,000 articles, you can develop a list of functions that glutathione carries out in your body, and that list will be dozens of subjects long. Many of these roles would not be understandable to most, but I've broken them down into four easy to remember things. So if you can remember these four major functions, you probably know 90% of what glutathione does in your body. So just remember, glutathione, what a great idea. What do these letters stand for? I stands for the immune system, D stands for detoxification, E stands for energy, and A stands for antioxidant. Let's look at these in turn. When we look at the immune system, we need to consider glutathione literally as food or fuel for the immune system. If you're low in glutathione, you're immunocompromised. If you have optimal levels of glutathione, well, you have a chance of having an optimum immune system. D stands for detoxification, and I tell people that next to water, next to water, there is no more important detoxification substance in your body. There are thousands of chemicals, pollutants, and toxins that we need glutathione to get rid of. E stands for energy. It's a major source of energy in the body. Our mitochondria, those little batteries that are inside of our cells, would literally burn up were it not for a continual source of glutathione. And this is exemplified by, of course, the amount of elite and professional athletes using Immunical to raise glutathione. And finally, A. Glutathione is referred to as the master antioxidant. It's called the master antioxidant because all of the other antioxidants, they cannot work without the presence of glutathione. So you'll remember these four functions, and you can start to appreciate why glutathione has such a profound effect in your body and why it holds such enormous potential in keeping you healthy and treating health issues. In fact, the number of health issues in which glutathione is involved in increases every month. It's a challenge to keep on top of this. And this will be a good time to plug my book. There you see my book, my latest one on glutathione, which you can get on Amazon. I've done the work for you. My latest book on glutathione is the most complete reference guide to the subject, and I've gone through thousands of references to write it. And the book is referenced itself chapter by chapter. It covers an enormous list of topics, including today's topic, aging. So let's take a closer look at aging now. Very popular subject, especially among baby boomers. But you youngsters out there, pay attention because you will be involved one day. This is a disease that all of you are suffering from. And I hope that you suffer from this disease for a long time. There are still people out there who scoff at anti-aging medicine, but this has become an established field with its own specialty exams, conferences, journals. But for those of you out there that still have some doubts about this, let me point out the following. When I asked them, what was the average life expectancy of a man at the turn of the 20th century? The answer is 47 years old. 47 years old. When I was in high school, I was taught that an American man had a life expectancy of 65 years old. Nowadays, the number is up and probably over 80 years old. So we've actually been practicing anti-aging medicine for over 100 years. Nothing new here other than a stronger focus on the aging process. Now here's an interesting graph. We see that glutathione levels drop consistently as we age, about 10% drop in glutathione per decade of life. So someone my age, I'd be at about half the level I was when I was 20 years old if I weren't doing something about it. So the level goes down and down the older we get, but wait, something strange is going on here at the end of the graph. When you measure glutathione levels in people who are like 100 years old, all of a sudden you find this group has relatively high glutathione levels. Why? Well, the answer is that's why they're 100 years old. They had the inherent genetic or environmental ability to maintain high levels of glutathione. And this allowed them to survive to be 100. Their friends and their enemies who didn't have this capacity all died off. This is natural selection at its finest. So this leads us to the question that researchers have actually looked at, whether there's a true correlation between glutathione levels and longevity. Let's take a look. Nowadays, with the rapid development of DNA and gene testing, we've discovered that there are several glutathione genes that we all have encoded. And within these groups of genes, there are variations. Many people, in fact, have abnormal glutathione genetics. And this has become more and more apparent as these tests become more available. Scientists are doing a lot of this type of work now, correlating gene abnormalities with different disease states to do prognosis testing and working out potential treatments and cures. A lot of studies have correlated abnormal glutathione genes with things like the likelihood of developing different cancers or lung disease or other problems. This study here looks at glutathione abnormalities and longevity specifically. So this is looking at glutathione and longevity. Many other studies are available. Another approach is to look specifically at the group of people who display exceptional longevity. Here, researchers collected available articles in the medical literature looking at individuals who are 97 years or older and compared them to younger age groups in terms of markers of oxidative stress. And as expected, these people had significantly higher levels of glutathione enzymes, a clear correlation. This study took the opposite approach. It concluded that the risk of dying increases with a diet low in cysteine. And of course, you know, cysteine is the limiting factor for the cellular production of glutathione. They are promoting the use of glutathione precursors should be a focus of a healthy diet in the elderly to decrease mortality or death. Now, I take you back over 30 years ago to one of Dr. Gustavo Bunos's earlier studies. This is shortly after his team discovered that the main way that their recently discovered protein worked was by raising glutathione. One of the breakthrough studies here happened when a group of laboratory animals showed increased resistance to disease and in certain cancer. The team published a study demonstrating that these animals lived anywhere between 30 and 50% longer. This was a huge discovery and certainly garnered a lot of attention and further funding. Even today, people are sending me studies showing what is considered remarkable substances that prolong the life of a rat of more than 10%. Well, geez, we did better, and we did that over 30 years ago with Immunical. Now, of course, it would be nice to do such a study in humans, but this would be pretty much impossible to do. It will be too difficult to control all the variables that take place in a human's lifespan and try to get 80 years of funding. However, this has been done multiple times in mice as well as in other laboratory animals. Raising glutathione levels in laboratory animals will lead to an increased longevity. This is very clear. So we've covered some basics about glutathione and aging. Let's take a look at diseases of aging. Let's look at health and glutathione in general in an older population. Here's a study done in Florida looking at geriatric patients. They looked at four populations: young volunteers in blue, healthy older people, meaning that they only went to see a doctor if they needed to. This is in green. Older outpatients in yellow, who had regular visits to the doctor or for checkups, blood pressure checks, drug refills, etc. And finally, geriatrics patients that were admitted to the hospital in red. And then they measured glutathione levels in all of these populations. And look, a perfect correlation between glutathione levels and their degree of health. Very revealing. The higher the glutathione, the higher the level of health. Here's a European study published in the journal Gerontology. This is a newer term for geriatrics. The scientists measured glutathione levels in over 2,500 individuals over the age of 60. This is a very large study. Then they listed what's called multimorbidity. What is multimorbidity? It's the development of different chronic diseases over time, like diabetes, COPD, heart disease, etc. Morbidity means illness. Multimorbidity means multiple illnesses. So they matched up glutathione levels and the accumulation of diseases over 6 years. This is quite an undertaking. So multimorbidity itself can be considered as the most common clinical condition linked to aging. In other words, most aged people are suffering from more than one illness. And this, of course, is going to affect both their physical and mental health, and certainly their quality of life. And as you could have predicted, there was a perfect correlation between glutathione levels and multimorbidity. In other words, the lower the glutathione levels were, the more chronic diseases were present. Very important. So, what are specific diseases of aging? There really is a long list, but let's look at some of the more common ones. Here's a short list, and just take a look. It includes cancer, heart disease, stroke, arthritis, different neurodegenerative diseases, and so on. And you could probably think of some more on your own. So this is a short list of diseases of aging. Now, here's the thing, and I want you to remember this. Each and every one on the list here is related to glutathione deficiency. It's impossible to count the number of studies that have demonstrated this. Glutathione levels are inversely correlated to most common diseases of aging in the Western world. Take cancer, for example. The incidence of cancer in the population shows a dramatic increase as we get older. Sure, easily think of something like prostate cancer as age-related, but so is colon cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, and so on. Aging is a clear risk factor for the development of cancer. And I'm not going to do a discussion of glutathione and cancer. We've covered this in other webinars. I will, however, welcome you to visit this topic. You can find the presentation on the YouTube address on the slide here. I'll just give you a moment to write that address down. Immunosenescence. Here's a word that's new to most of you. It describes the weakening of the immune system with age. You probably haven't heard of this word because it's not a disease itself. It's a natural process that comes along with aging. You get older, your immune system gets older, and most often weaker. And this can be shown with cell counts and functionality of specific immune cells. There you see certain ones listed. Here's a chart from a study looking at glutathione levels in the white blood cells of different age groups. The white blood cells, which are the immune system's frontline soldiers, go by different names, including lymphocytes. Here we see a steady decline in white blood cell glutathione levels as an individual ages. This is correlated with a weakening of the immune system's functioning. I need to mention cataracts here because this was one of the first places that glutathione levels were found to be depressed with the occurrence of disease. This was reported by ophthalmologists many years ago and stimulated others to research glutathione levels in other issues of aging as well. This article describes the progressive loss of glutathione in the lens of the eye that occurs with aging. They're promoting effective strategies of raising glutathione levels in the eye as a potential treatment. Now, I know a lot of people on this call that have experience with a glutathione precursor, Immunical. I keep hearing stories about people with cataracts being followed by eye doctors, some of which have cataract surgery planned, who have had to cancel their surgery because of improvement in the cataract. I'm sure a lot of you have heard those stories. Now, no discussion of diseases in aging would miss Alzheimer's disease as a major entity. In fact, next to cancer, this is the one disease that middle-aged and older people fear the most. Over 1 in 10 people over the age of 65 will get Alzheimer's. And this number probably is a low estimate since so many cases go undiagnosed or unreported. The official number goes up to a full third of individuals over the age of 85. This has been thoroughly studied. Glutathione levels are very low in patients with Alzheimer's disease, and the level of glutathione impairment correlates with the degree of severity of the disease. Many neuroscientists have suggested that following glutathione levels is a good way to develop prognosis in these patients. Most importantly, researchers are actively studying ways of improving cognition in Alzheimer's disease by raising glutathione. And for those of you involved with Immunical, you will have heard many testimonials. So we've discovered that glutathione levels are clearly depleted in Alzheimer's disease. But what about milder forms of dementia? What about what we call MCI, or mild cognitive impairment? Well, the answer is yes. What is MCI? Mild cognitive impairment is a state where there are early changes in, for example, memory. It's all common for a 60-year-old person not to remember somebody's name that they just met or to lose their keys often. But these annoying things don't really affect their ability to get through the day. In fact, I'll bet the majority of 60-year-olds on this call can relate to what I'm saying. These people cannot be considered as suffering from dementia, but having this condition often will eventually lead to Alzheimer's. In other words, MCI is a risk factor for the development of future full-blown dementia. And guess what? MCI patients can also be defined as having lower glutathione levels. Look at this study here that followed levels for 2 years in patients diagnosed with MCI. Glutathione levels were tested every 6 months. And here, if we look at the marked column, you'll see a very concerning loss of glutathione continually through all that time period. This screams out for something to be done. What about Parkinson's disease? Does this loss of glutathione take place in other neurodegenerative diseases? Well, I've done a great amount of research in neurodegeneration and glutathione, and there are multiple chapters in my latest book on glutathione that look at these different neurological diseases, and it is an all too common issue occurring in the majority of neurodegeneration we see today. Look at that list. In this study, actual brains were obtained at autopsy, and glutathione levels were compared between Parkinson's patients, Alzheimer's patients, and normal individuals. As expected, glutathione levels were decreased in both of these neurodegenerative diseases as compared to unaffected brains. Other papers have shown that the greatest decrease in glutathione in the Parkinsonian brain is in the tissues most affected in Parkinson's, that being a region of the brain we call a substantia nigra in the basal ganglia region. Sometimes a drop to only a few percentage of normal. So can raising glutathione help here? Well, these doctors used an instrument to measure the actual shaking of a Parkinson's patient. As you know, there's a particular type of tremor seen in this disease. The baseline tremor is shown on the top. And the patient was given intravenous glutathione, and the tremor was noticeably improved, as you see in the middle graph. Unfortunately, intravenous glutathione is short-lived, so after the study, the patient went back to their original level of shaking. We can go on and on looking at diseases of aging and showing the correlation to glutathione depletion, but for the sake of time, let me just say this. The vast majority of diseases of aging are related to a loss of glutathione, and much work is being done looking at correcting this. This is an area of very active interest, and more articles come out every month, and it's a challenge to keep on top of this. And all of this research has led to glutathione as being a key molecule in our understanding and application of anti-aging strategies. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you so much, Doc. Yes, I mean, the last 2 years we've been enjoying those kind of session actually. So now, thank you so much. And I know you have some times, right, to answer a few questions. So I know a lot of the questions you will ask have been answered in this session, but go ahead and yeah, choose your questions wisely.
So I'm going to go in the Q&A. No,
Me too. And
I'm
I
going to
don't
go
see.
to the chat. Someone is asking, what is the difference in intravenous glutathione and Immunical? There's a great difference. There's a great difference. Believe it or not, intravenous glutathione, the half-life of intravenous glutathione is measured literally in minutes. In minutes. And I do actually have another video on this that you can find on my YouTube channel under, I think the title is Raising Glutathione for Health Professionals. It looks at intravenous glutathione and shows you the articles where intravenous glutathione works for minutes. So remember that graph I showed you of that Parkinson's shaking? They were given glutathione intravenously, and the shaking slowed down. But literally, by the time the person made it home, the shaking started again. So intravenous glutathione, it may be interesting for certain detoxifications, but there are dangers of getting intravenous started, whether it's with glutathione or otherwise. But it's not a very effective treatment for any long-term or chronic disease. Let me see what other questions there are.
I see one question here from Cindy B.
Yes.
We are able to get our levels of glutathione tested in Canada, maybe private physicians?
Yes, this is another question that's asked all the time. Can I get a glutathione test? Well, the answer is yes and no. There are many places that you could find online on the internet that offer to measure glutathione levels. The problem with these tests that they are extremely inaccurate and not worth the $30 or $40 or $50 that you're going to spend on it. Measuring glutathione is actually a very complicated process. You need to get fresh blood. You need to spin it down in the centrifuge. You need to take out a layer of what we call lymphocytic, the lymphocytic layer, which is the layer that represents white blood cells. And you need to measure the glutathione in the white blood cells. There are a lot of companies that measure whole blood glutathione or red blood cell glutathione or serum glutathione. These are not accurate reflections of what's going on inside of the cells that count, especially your white blood cells, which are your immune systems. To do a proper glutathione test will cost a couple $100. When we do our studies, for example, in cancer and or in other in AIDS, we set up a certain a part of the laboratory. We get an expert to do this, someone who's done this before, and we don't always get great results because it is a complicated and costly procedure. But one day, in the near future, there'll be either a very clever American company or Chinese company that will come up with a cheap and effective way of measuring glutathione. And when that happens, your doctor will be getting a glutathione measurement on you every year, the same way that he or she measures your blood sugar or your cholesterol or anything else. And that day is coming.
All right. I see here. Does immunocal interfere with an HGH topical gel?
No, no interaction.
We have Sonia here. I have kidney disease and just began dialysis. Stage 5 kidney disease, actually, and just began dialysis. Been on the platinum 3 weeks, and oh my God, I'm getting miracles already. Should I be taking more immunocols than a normal person?
This is also a very tricky question. The person has a late stage kidney failure and they're on dialysis. Now, a lot of people with kidney failure or renal failure are told to limit the amount of protein that they can take in a day. In other words, some people might be given nutritional guidance where they shouldn't be eating more than 40 grams of protein a day. Now, a Munical is a protein. So I get calls from people who are scared. They're saying, I have kidney disease. I don't want to take Communical because it's a protein, or the doctors will say avoid proteins. Every edible protein can be assigned a number called a biological value. And what the biological value, or BV, represents is the usefulness for that protein in your everyday metabolism. In other words, how important that protein is to your body. There's not another edible protein, not another protein, whether it's meat or fish or soy or whatever it is, that has a higher biological value than Immunocal. So if you're limited to 40 grams of protein a day, you're far better off having a pouch of Immunical instead of having a Wendy's hamburger. So just be sure that you calculate that each pouch of Immunical is worth approximately 10 grams of protein. If you're having fantastic results, stick with the dose that you're taking.
Amazing. All right. It says what medication, but is there any medications that are contraindicated taking immunocol?
There's really only one absolute contraindication, and that's for people who are taking immunosuppressants because they have received a living tissue transplantation. For example, if somebody donated a kidney and you're the recipient of that kidney, you have a kidney transplant, you take immunosuppressants so that you don't reject the transplantation. So your immune system needs to be suppressed. We're worried about taking Immunical in that situation in case it provokes a rejection. In 30 years, I've never seen that happen, but this is what we have written in the American PDR, and this is what we have written in the Canadian CPS. These are the two books that tell doctors whatever it is that they can prescribe to you. And those are listed contraindications. So we will stick with that advice. Otherwise, there really aren't any complete contraindications to any medications.
Okay. Is the whey okay for people who are sensitive to casein and vegans, lactose intolerance?
Um, well, the answer for Immunical is no, but I need to elaborate on that. Um, Immunical is a very special whey protein isolate that is undenatured. The majority of whey proteins that are used are not isolates. They're either concentrates or just regular whey. These regular wheys, the ones that are not isolates, often have a substantial amount of lactose and fat in them. And if you have a lactose intolerance, then you could react to the lactose and have the cramps and nausea and diarrhea and all those other wonderful symptoms that you've heard of. Immunical has all of the lactose removed. There's like a fraction of a percent left. So even the most lactose intolerant person can take Immunical. The other things that are in whey proteins, uh, whey proteins is actually a big family. And the protein that most people are allergic to is a protein called casein. Immunical is not interested in casein because casein is not a glutathione precursor. So almost all of the casein, again, less than a percentage and a half, all of the casein is taken out of the Immunical. So if you're allergic to Immunical, it's a pretty rare thing because the most common milk allergy is to casein. People say that they're allergic to milk, but most of them are actually lactose intolerant. So the lactose is gone as well. So,
All right.
Dylan, I think we're running up to the end of our program.